And then it states back in verse 3 that trials are various kinds. There are trials of different kinds. This means it could be anything. It could be sickness. It could be insults. It might be physical suffering. And maybe it's mental anguish. And maybe it's a tense relationship. But whatever it is, we need to remember that God is working through that, and God is bringing us to completion. He is maturing us as believers.
Do you understand the reason for the trials that you're facing? Do you understand why there are trials and why God has trials in your life? That's what we're going to take a look at today as we continue our series through the book of James and continue in James, a faith that works. Faith that works in trials. This is a Truth Transforms Truth Nugget. A daily dose of truth for your daily transformation. Welcome back to another Truth Nugget. We're going to continue in this sermon in our series in the book of James, and the sermon which is about faith working in trials. James is all about having a faith that works, practically living out that faith. And there's so much to learn and so much that is shown to us about trials and the purpose of trials and God's working in us in trials and his sanctifying work. And so we're going to be continuing in this sermon entitled Faith That Works in Trials from James chapter 1 verses 1 to 4. My name's Adam Markley. If you're new here, there is a playlist to all of the Truth Nuggets in James. You'll see that in the description below. Also, there's a gift for you at www.preachingforgodsglory.org/gift. It is a small little ebook entitled Lessons in Philippians. I hope that it's a blessing. It is down there in the description. We're going to get back into this. I'll be backing it up just a little bit to reorient us, and we will continue on in this section here. This point is going to be the reason for trials.
So we count it all joy that God is conforming us to the image of Christ, and we look ahead to the day when there will be no more trials in this sin-sick world. Well, James continues in verse 3, and here he gives us the reason for trials. That faith that works in trials allows us to understand the reason for trials. Verse 3, for you know that the testing of your faith produces steadfastness. Now, he's saying that the testing of the faith has a result, and the result of that, or the reason for it, is to produce steadfastness in us, is to produce steadfastness. He writes, you know that the testing of your faith produces the steadfastness. So he's saying you already know this. The trials serve a purpose. God is testing your faith. He's testing the genuineness of your faith. He's testing the strength of your faith. He's testing your endurance in the Christian walk. God is testing your commitment to Him. There are things that God is testing. James writes that the trials in this life are a means of testing our faith. And he says these trials produce steadfastness. Now the word trials means to be tested. It means to be proven. So there is an element of God proving our genuineness, the genuineness of our faith. Now, He already knows if we believe or not. He already knows the genuineness of our faith, but it's through the testing that the truth comes out. It's through the testing that the revelation comes out, both to us and to Him, that whether we truly know Him. But then there's a testing of our faith in the sense of just how much we believe God, how much we believe Him in different areas of our life. And through the testing and through the trials, it will show us, and it will show God how strong or how weak our faith in Him is in different areas. Testing serves a purpose. Trials are given for a purpose. Christian growth is the purpose. We experience trials in order to reach Christian maturity. Suffering occurs on this earth because we simply live in a fallen world. But we're told that as believers in the Lord Jesus, we're given specific trials for the purpose of producing steadfastness. God tests His children. He tests us to see if our faith is truly genuine. And He tests us to see how much we really believe Him. And God tests us to see how strong our allegiance is for Him. See, nobody grows in their faith when life is easy. Can you imagine? There's a purpose for tests. Can you imagine if a child was going to school and that child in years and years of school never had a test? And you say, well, that's kind of odd, right? How would you know if they're paying attention? How would you know how they're doing? How would you know if she's growing at all if she's never had a test? Unless you don't test in homeschool. I know that you test. See some smiles. But there's a testing. There's a testing in which you know that there is growth that is occurring. There's a test of some sort, and we know God is showing us that there is a growth that is occurring. And we're given different kinds of tests. We're given pop quizzes sometimes. Those nasty little things in our lives that are very short-lived, but a pop quiz, how are you doing in your walk? A pop quiz, how are you going to respond to this? And then sometimes there are very extensive exams. And these are the ones that really challenge our faith and really dig in to our faith. So God gives us tests, and we can be sure that there will be testing in this life. Now, God has a reason for this testing, and we must respond in a way that glorifies Him and understand that there's a reason for trials. Faith that works in trials will understand that there's a reason for those trials. Well, lastly, in verse 4, we see the result of trials. James finishes this section by giving the result of trials. Faith that works in trials directs our attention to the future result of trials. This faith that works in trials will put our attention to what the future holds. And so in verse 4, he says, and let steadfastness have its full effect, that you may be perfect and complete, lacking in nothing. So James states in verse 3 that the testing of one's faith produces steadfastness. Now in verse 4, he explains steadfastness. And he says that we should let steadfastness run its course. And let steadfastness have its full effect, that you may be perfect and complete, lacking in nothing. So perfect and complete, that's the idea that the Christian is being matured, that we're being brought to completion. This isn't a sinless perfection, although one day when we're off this earth, this is like a grape reaching maturity. This is a maturation process that the Christian is walking in. That we will be perfect and complete. We will be mature Christians. We are growing in our walk. And one day we will be perfect and complete when we're off of this earth. But there is a growing process that is necessary and that is needed, and that is the result of these trials. Well, you also notice that trials is plural. This means that there might be more than one of them. There might be more than one of them that head your way. There might be one after another for a season of life. There's no guarantee as to the trials that we do or don't have in our life. And then it states back in verse 3 that trials are various kinds. There are trials of different kinds. This means it could be anything. It could be sickness. It could be insults. It might be physical suffering. And maybe it's mental anguish. And maybe it's a tense relationship. But whatever it is, we need to remember that God is working through that, and God is bringing us to completion. He is maturing us as believers. So whatever it is, we should count it all joy. We're told, count it all joy that God is working in us. And see, some trials might be the consequence of your own sin. It very well could be. It might be that you sinned in some way, and that trial headed your way because of your own decisions, your own wrongful decisions that have gone against God's will. And it might be because of someone else's sin. You might have experienced a trial in your life because someone else has sinned and brought it upon you or brought it upon your family. It could be a combination. Or, like many times, it's not because of any sin. It's not because of anything you did wrong. It's just because there is a real reality that we have trials in this earth. That we will face testing, that we will face suffering in this earth. And so regardless of the reason for the trial, we need to remember that God is working in us and maturing us as believers. And we need to keep a heavenly perspective in all circumstances and remember that God is building our character and our trust in Him. The trials that we experience will either deepen our faith or cause us to get angry at God. The suffering that we encounter will either cause us to rejoice in our future hope or become disillusioned with God. Which is it going to be? We need to choose how we respond. Nobody increases in strength by living an easy life. And I want to tell you, an underdeveloped theology of suffering will lead to an underdeveloped view of God. We need to have an area in our mind, an area in our theology to deal with the trials that come our way. And we need to have a high enough view of God to not let it shake our faith. Studying and putting this sermon together, and I just had to stop and pray, God, I hate trials. I hate testing. I hate suffering. You want me to preach on this? Yeah, that's not verbally, but I feel the thought's kind of like, well, yeah, you need to learn this. You need to learn the reason for these trials. You need to learn what I'm doing through these trials. You need to learn that we are conforming. I am conforming you. I am conforming everybody, all believers, into the image of Christ. This is the purpose of the trials. And we need to understand what God is doing in the trials, no matter what the trials are, no matter how difficult the trials are. We need to know what God is doing. And when you read stories, I mean, I can think of some trials that, it's a little more understandable. You look back in your life and, lost just job at that time, and God was doing this through that. And I can look at different situations, but it seems that when it comes to some reason physical things like a paraplegic, what is God doing there? Those are the questions I have. It's fine to have the questions, but we need to understand that God is working through these trials to bring about completion. And it doesn't mean that God is wishing these things. These things are here because we live in this fallen world. But this is part of living the Christian life, and this is part of living in this world. That bad stuff happens, and that when it happens, it will test how strong our faith is in God. If a father backs out, hits his child, and that child dies, that will be a test of how strong his faith was in God. God doesn't wish that to happen, but things happen, and it's a test of our faith. It's simply revealing what we already believe. It's simply revealing how strong or weak our faith already is. And nobody increases in strength by living an easy life. And you picture a boxer that won a championship. And this boxer wins the championship, and he's asked, well, how did you do it? How did you get to the top? And he says, I just kept showing up to work. I just kept showing up to practice. And one day I was elevated to the position of champion. And you say, well, that just sounds ridiculous. Well, of course it does, because we know life doesn't work that way. Life just doesn't work that way. It takes intense devotion to achieve the feat that he achieved. It takes intense drive and desire and trials, knockdowns and beatings and crazy training to build up the endurance and to build up the toughness to get to that championship level. And sometimes the Christian walk is like that. If you think of any endeavor, it's the times when you've been tried the hardest. It's the times when you've been tested the most. It's the time in which you've been pushed to the limit that you've experienced the most growth. It's what's necessary for success in any area of life, and sometimes God is pushing us to the limits. He's working in us and He's doing something.
Well, do you believe that? Do you believe that God is working in us and doing something in the most difficult trials in this life? He certainly is. He says that He is in His Word, and James is making that clear in this passage. And that is something that we should remember, and that is something that we are told to count it all joy, even at times when it does not seem joyful. But we can have joy in Christ at all times, and we can count it all joy that God is doing a sanctifying work within us. We need to press in to God, seek Him in prayer, and spend time in His Word, and ask Him the lessons that we need to learn during whatever trial it might be that you're going through right now. God bless you. Thank you for joining me for today's Truth Nugget, and I will see you here as we close out the sermon tomorrow.